today has to have a second video because there has been a development in a story that has been going on for quite a long time now, and I think it's so pertinent to the current news in the cycle, to the current zeitgeist out here in our country, dealing with the whole school violence issue and what we do about the school children that seem out of control. As many people have pointed out, with the current issues that we are aware of, if you live in Trinidad and Tobago, where the schoolgirl recently was charged and expelled from a school for the stabbing of another schoolgirl, and it was alleged that that situation came out of bullying that was going on, that the person who wielded the knife, victim of bullying in previous situations at the hands of who is presently the victim in this present situation. Now, as with many of the things around this case and many of the cases like this, the facts are not clear. They are not known yet. So to try and put a definitive judgment on something is a bit far out there. But when you are looking at some of the facts that are presented, I think some plausible conclusions can be drawn. Some opinions can be given based on it. And I've been seeing lately more and more people giving opinions leaning towards the side of something called self-defense, where if the case is, as some people allege, this girl was the victim of bullying, then it could have been self-defense. And there's a court case that has recently been decided that seems to point favorably in that direction. Before we get into that, make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you drop a comment on the topic if you have something interesting to say. You can feel free also to hit me up in anywhere you see me in my inbox or DMs if you are interested in placing an order for any of the Mindful merchandise, the hats, the t-shirts. Let me know. You can feel free to support in that way if you are interested. And let's get into this story. Schoolboy freed of murder, charged at 15 with killing schoolmate in fight over girl. Now, this story I remember very well. I remember this in the news, and it really did make a big blip in the news, because I believe this was around the time where a second schoolboy was killed also. Where I believe he belonged to Karapichaima Senior Second. Well, it's no longer Karapichaima Senior. It then became Karapichaima West, I think. And I think that incident could have also been in Marabella, where he was beaten and he eventually succumbed to his injuries. So this was around that time where, similar to now, there was heightened focus and attention on the violence occurring in schools. A schoolboy who was charged with murder of another schoolboy was yesterday found not guilty of the crime after spending 9 years in prison. Now, that I think is another problem right there that has to do maybe with the Bail Act. Interesting. Jonathan Timothy Bruce was 15 years old at the time, remained in prison custody, charged with stabbing to death Ronaldo Dixon over a girl on the morning of May 27th. 2013 at Waterloo Secondary School. Like, when you see that date there, and it just plays in my mind a bit. For young people, this boy at 15, one moment, probably 10 minutes of whatever incident occurred. One day, May 27, 2013, a day that means nothing to me personally. I was alive back then, but that day means nothing to me. I can't remember what I was doing back then. Who knows? But that day, that single day, probably 10 minutes of the day of May 27th, 2013, forever changed, well, the guy who died, unfortunately, and this guy too, who would have spent basically a decade in prison. Wow. A High Court judge, it happened at Waterloo Secondary School, by the way. That's why I would be more familiar with it. I live in Central. A High Court judge yesterday delivered a verdict of not guilty in favor of Bruce after finding that Dixon was actually the one who initiated and prolonged the altercation that led to his death. Based on the evidence, Justice Geoffrey Henderson said he found Bruce was acting in self-defense after the prosecution failed to prove otherwise. So here we see, presently, one young man, one child, one boy, unfortunately died. Same weapon, same type of weapon. In this case, it was 1v1. One boy, one boy. And you'd find out eventually the boy who unfortunately died, lost his life, he was actually in a lower form than the boy who is currently, well, who was recently freed of the charges. So it was a younger boy, very likely 1v1. And still, because this boy initiated and prolonged the altercation, it was found that the one who actually had the weapon and attacked the other one, killing them, actually did it in self-defense, and the case was thrown out. Now, this isn't to say that you walk to school with a weapon and you do that and call it self-defense, because nonetheless, bear in mind, this young boy spent 9 years in prison. 15, he's currently 24 years old. That's a very long time, 15 to 24. In prison, 15 to 24 is the time in your life where probably you have the most flamboyant memories of your life. That's that period. The point where you're young enough to still get away with making a few silly mistakes, but you're old enough to be better at doing everything you're doing. So that's the point where many people may say they lived their best years. That's unfortunate if you lived your best years there. I think that should be the point. You create the platform to, allow your best years to follow you as you go on throughout the rest of your life. But for many people, because of the activity, your age, your health, your vibrancy, you start to earn some money. Those are the years for that. He spent all those years in prison. So self-defense or not, he still paid a serious consequence for it. But nonetheless, it was self-defense. He was not found guilty of a crime. While he had been successful on the self-defense argument, the judge noted Bruce had a knife in his possession on the school's compound. After Dixon was stabbed, a knife was also found in one of his pants pockets. Bruce was a fifth form pupil, while Dixon was a form 3. Yeah, 2 years lower. Wow. So in this instance, the judge noted similarly as people are noting with the current instance with the schoolgirl, why is a knife on the school compound? But as I said in the live last night, if a system is failing, if the entire system is failing to protect the individuals in the system, the individuals are going to attempt to get solutions on their own. If you leave a 15-year-old to figure out solutions on how to protect themselves when they are presented with imminent danger, you are going to end up with things like bringing knives to school. And this shows that since 2013, which is 9 years ago, this has been happening. This young girl isn't a new instance. And even back then, 9 years ago, the boy who had the knife was seen to be protecting himself with the knife. So here you have a boy carrying a knife to school, and a judge finding ultimately that what he did with the knife he carried to school was actually self-defense. So legally, the judge noted that the knife was horrible to have in the school compound. But legally, can that be said to be justifiable? And if it is justifiable, the reason it is justifiable is because the current school system is creating an environment where children see the need to carry a weapon for self-defense. If a child uses a weapon successfully in self-defense, then the problem is, why do they need the weapon for self-defense? You shouldn't be looking at the child and saying, no, bad child. No more self-defense, child. No more self-defense. No, you should be looking at the environment that you are creating that allows a child to say that, you know what, I need to carry a weapon for self-defense. Because you are the person in charge in this instance, as the adult. The stabbing took place, and this I find to be probably the saddest part of this entire thing. Well, no, probably not the saddest, but one of the most unfortunate parts of this entire incident. The stabbing took place after the girl, while in the presence of both Bruce and Dixon, was asked by Dixon to choose between him and the other boy. While hesitant at first, she eventually chose Bruce. with whom she previously had a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship for a short while before it came to an end the previous month. So, this is unfortunate all how. The young man who lost his life, he was the one who initiated the question, "Girl, you have to choose between me and him." He was the one who was not chosen. Sheesh. He was the one who initiated the altercation. He was the one who prolonged the altercation. He was the one who also had a knife in his pocket, and he was the one who died. This unfortunate case shows real misfortune and bad decisions on this young man's part. He made consecutive bad decisions leading to his untimely, unfortunate demise here. And I hope that's a lesson. If any young people are listening to this, listen. If the girl don't choose you, okay, fine, sir. You're in Form 3. You're in Form 3. You have a really long time. And to be very honest, if you're looking at the dating markets, you're in Form 3. You're not of much value as a date. Go study your work. Learn some work. Get your education. Make yourself of some value. And then come back to the question sometime later. Unfortunately for this young man, he would never be able to return to this question. In delivering his verdict, the judge pointed out this case came at a time when violence in schools is a topical subject. He said the case should be a lesson to those pupils who are bent on violence, and they should know there are consequences for their actions. Let this be a lesson for those students who may be aware of this case, that even though at the end of this trial, Jonathan Timothy Bruce was acquitted for a school fight, firstly, knives have no places in schools. Pens, pencils, and books, but knives have no places in schools. And the court noted that there was a knife found in the front pocket of the deceased, and there was another knife that was never retrieved in this investigation. So there were two knives. What are knives doing in schools? I don't know. But for those who have looked on, here's a schoolboy who has spent 9 years of his life awaiting trial. So even though he is acquitted, he has lost 9 years. It would have been better if everybody had just walked away. Very true. Nothing can be taken away from what the judge said there. Very factual. It would have been better for everyone involved if they just walked away. Walk away. But is it justice in a country that has respect for the rights and freedom of an individual? If you looked at my previous live, or if you looked at the previous video where we broke down some of our constitution, you'll know why that statement is very important. Is it right in a nation that has respect for the rights and freedoms of the individual that a boy at the age of 15 could spend 9 years in jail for what ostensibly at the end, what the justice system said at the end, was a justifiable act? Now, if you're saying that the 9 years was punishment for what he did nonetheless, then okay, fine. But then I think that should be done through due process. There was no due process to say that he should spend 9 years in jail for what he did. He should have gone to a court. The court said, yes, this is self-defense, but we think that you still behaved inappropriately, so 9 years in prison for you 15-year-old boy. But in a nation where we supposedly have respect for individual rights and freedoms out there, how does a boy at the age of 15 spend 9 years in prison, and then at the end of it you tell him, well, you didn't really do anything wrong? How? Someone please explain that to me. That's all I have for now. I hope you're educated, informed, or entertained. And hit that like button, drop a comment, tell me what you think. Make sure you are subscribed. And I will see you later for the Mindful Live.